At 5:18 a.m., January 3, 1945, Nebraska was a frozen battlefield. No sirens, no gunfire, just a sharp, merciless cold that made fence posts crack like rifle shots. Most trains were already running slow because of the blizzard sweeping across the Midwest. But one train, the westbound number 47 Military Supply Express, wasn't slowing at all. Couldn't. It was carrying ammunition, medical crates, personnel transfers, and fuel tanks, cargo that absolutely had to reach the coast. The schedule was wartight, and the pressure was brutal. 30 miles east, in a POW section of the Holcomb Rail Depot, German prisoners were finishing their dawn labor shift. They weren't soldiers here. They were workers, shoveling coal, clearing snow from switches, tightening bolts on old rails. And among them was Eric Bauer, 27, prisoner number 2143, former railway maintenance apprentice in Bavaria. Before the war, he'd spent his days repairing mountain tracks, studying brake lines, and listening to old inspectors talk about the little fixes that save big lives. But none of that mattered here. To the guards, he was just another uniform with the letters PW stamped across the back. The wind kept rising, hurling white sheets of snow across the yard. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Guards stomped their boots, trying to stay warm. Someone swore the temperature had hit -30. Eric just kept working silently, wiping frost from his eyelashes every few seconds. He knew this kind of cold. He'd seen rails twist, metal fracture, bolts shear clean off. And when something failed on a mountain line, one moment of carelessness could send a whole train into a valley. That was when he heard it. A metallic rattle beneath the wind. Very faint, very wrong. He paused, leaned down, pressed his glove against the rail. A vibration, not steady, a kind of jittery tremble. A sign old German engineers used to warn about. A rail that shakes is a rail that's about to break. Eric followed the vibration a few yards and froze. One of the joint plates, the metal piece holding two sections of rail together, was hanging by a single bolt. The other bolt had snapped under the cold. The gap between the rails was widening, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. If a fast train hit that gap, you didn't get derailments. You got explosions. You got fireballs. You got history's worst headlines. Eric stood up, looked toward the distant signal tower glowing faintly through the storm. A train was coming. Soon. The rails hummed faintly beneath his boots. He shouted to a guard, no response through the wind. He shouted again, louder, pointing down at the track. The guard didn't come, didn't move. He probably didn't even hear him. Eric's heart punched his ribs. There was no time, no tools, no clearance, no permission. Just one half-frozen German prisoner staring at a rail that was seconds away from killing hundreds. And then he saw something half-buried in the snow. A rusted toolbox, left from the night shift. Inside, one bolt, one wrench, and a piece of wire. A stupid, tiny set of scraps. But maybe, just maybe, enough to stop a tragedy. The wind howled like a living thing as Eric dropped to his knees beside the rail. His fingers burned with cold as he scraped snow away from the joint plate. The gap was widening fast, vibrations shaking it harder with every passing second. Somewhere in the distance, hidden by the whiteout, the faint echo of a train horn moaned through the storm. Not a warning horn, a speed signal horn. Number 47 wasn't slowing. It was accelerating. Eric's breath came sharp. He grabbed the rusted wrench from the toolbox, and his heart sank. The wrench was the wrong size. Couldn't grip the bolt head properly. Every attempt slipped. Metal screeched. His gloves tore. His fingers started going numb. Behind him, a guard finally noticed him kneeling on the track. "Hey, PW!" he yelled through the wind. "Get off the line. Now!" Eric didn't move. He couldn't. The broken rail shuddered again. Harder this time, sending a dull metallic crack across the frozen yard. This wasn't a maintenance problem anymore. This was a countdown. Eric ripped off his frozen gloves, letting the cold bite straight into his skin. He wrapped both bare hands around the wrench, forced it sideways, teeth clenched. The bolt turned a fraction, just enough to catch. Then another vibration hit. A violent one. It nearly knocked him onto the rail. PW. I set off the track, the guard shouted, starting toward him. Eric ignored him. He grabbed the spare bolt from the toolbox, a cheap, low-grade bolt barely strong enough for a fence gate, definitely not railroad steel. It didn't matter. It was all he had. He pressed the bolt into the open hole, twisting with shaking hands. It was misaligned. The joint plate kept slipping. His fingers were turning purple, but he forced it, angled it, threaded it, one thread, two threads. Slam! A shockwave rolled through the rail. The ground vibrated. The train was close, very close. The guard stopped yelling. He could hear the rumble now too. Eric didn't look up. He couldn't afford to. Every second he lost meant one more as the train thundered blindly toward a death trap. He shoved the wrench onto the bolt head and cranked with everything he had left. The metal groaned. His knuckles split open. The cold turned the blood to red crystals. The guard finally reached him, grabbing his shoulder. Are you insane? Get back. Eric looked up, eyes wide, voice raw. The rail is broken. The train will jump, explode. Everyone will die. The guard froze, not because he believed him, but because he felt it. The rail under their boots was shaking violently now. The sound hit them next. A deep, monstrous roar tearing through the blizzard. Number 47 was less than a minute away. Eric didn't wait for orders. He wrapped the loose wire around the joint plate, twisting it tight, locking it against the bolt so it wouldn't shear off immediately under weight. It was a stupid, tiny fix, something old German inspectors joked about. Wire won't stop a train, they used to say. But sometimes it buys enough seconds. That's all he needed. The bolt tightened. The wire locked. The gap sealed barely. Eric stumbled backward, hands torn, breathing hard. The guard grabbed him and dragged him off the track as the snow ahead began to glow. Headlights cutting through the storm like white fire. Number 47 was coming. And whatever happened next would happen in the next heartbeat. The blizzard exploded in light as number 47 burst through the white curtain. Its twin headlights blazing like the eyes of some iron beast charging out of the darkness. The ground trembled beneath Eric's boots. The tracks screamed under the weight. Snow blasted sideways from the engine's nose like twin wings of ice. The guard yanked Eric back just in time. Foam! The locomotive roared past them, steel wheels hammering the rails at nearly full speed. The shockwave nearly knocked them over. Eric shielded his face from the flying ice shards as the first string of fuel cars screamed by, each one a rolling bomb. The patched joint, Eric's tiny fix, disappeared under the train. For a single terrifying heartbeat, nothing happened. Then came the first sound. A metallic clunk. Not catastrophic, but not normal either. Eric's breath froze in his throat. The next wheel set hit. Another clunk. A grinding scrape. The joint plate flexed under the weight. More than it should have. The wire stretched. The bolt shuddered. The whole world held its breath. If that bolt snapped, if the wire sheared, if the rail shifted even half an inch, tank cars would flip, fuel would erupt, ammunition would detonate. The entire rail yard, guards, prisoners, civilians, would be swallowed in a firestorm so big newspapers would need a new word for disaster. The rail groaned again. Eric grabbed the guard's arm, whispering, "Come on, hold." Car after car thundered over his patch. Troop sleepers, flatbeds, medical crates, fuel tanks shaking violently against their couplings. The joint clanged, bent, snapped back, bent again. The guard turned pale. For the first time, he understood. This wasn't a prisoner fiddling with a bolt. This was a man wrestling with fate. Then came the worst part. The ammunition cars. Long steel containers, stenciled with the black letters, ordnance. Each one carrying artillery shells, mortar tubes, and crates packed with powder. Each one a bomb waiting for the wrong vibration. The first ordnance car struck the joint. Crack! The wire jerked so hard it sparked. Eric's heart slammed against his ribs. The guard took an involuntary step backward. The rail held, for now. The next ordnance car hit. Kerrang! The bolt bent, visibly shifting. Even from 20 feet away, Eric felt the tremor go straight into the ground. The guard whispered the same thing Eric was thinking. If one car jumps, just one, they'd be vaporized before they even heard the explosion. The final ordnance car blasted over the joint. The rail screamed like an injured animal, vibrating wildly, then steadied, just barely, as the caboose flashed past, red lanterns swinging like a heartbeat in the storm. And then, silence. A long, ringing silence broken only by the distant echo of the disappearing train. Eric let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His hands shook uncontrollably. Blood dripped from his knuckles onto the snow. The guard stared at the patched rail, eyes wide, breath trembling, realizing how close they'd been to becoming a crater. He looked at Eric, really looked at him for the first time. You weren't fixing it," he said quietly. "You were saving the whole damn county." But it wasn't over, because just then, another sound rose behind them, a deep metallic groan from the patched joint. The fix had survived the train, but it hadn't survived the strain. The bolt was bending. The wire was unwinding. The rail was tearing itself apart. And a second train, an eastbound passenger line, was scheduled in less than 8 minutes. The rail screamed again. A twisting metallic wail that didn't sound like cold anymore. It sounded like failure. Eric spun toward it, slipping in the snow. The bolt, the one he'd forced into place with raw hands, was now bending slowly sideways, metal fibers stretching like pulled taffy. The wire holding the joint plate was unwinding, each vibration loosening it more. The guard cursed under his breath. "Damn it! It's coming apart." Eric didn't answer. He already knew. Number 47's weight had pushed the rail to its absolute limit. Survived once, but it wouldn't survive twice. And the next train, a passenger line full of civilians, families, nurses, and workers, was already racing toward them, expecting a clear track. The guard grabbed the frozen signal phone from its box. Static. No operator. The storm had knocked out the line. "Try again," Eric shouted. "I am trying," the guard snapped, shaking the receiver. Nothing. No signal. No connection. No way to warn the oncoming train. The passenger engine would hit that broken joint at full speed. In this blizzard, the engineer would never see it. Eric looked up at the signal tower, barely visible through the blowing snow. If the signalman hadn't noticed the damage yet, he wouldn't in time. Not through the storm. Not at dawn. Not when visibility was 4 steps ahead. The guard looked at Eric, panic rising. "What do we do?" Eric stared at the failing rail, then at the storm, then at the tower. There was only one answer. A stupid answer. A suicidal answer. But the only one. "We run," he said. The guard blinked. "What?" "We run to the tower. Shut down the line. Now, before the next train reaches the bend. That's half a mile in this blizzard. We'll get lost." Eric grabbed the signal lantern, ripped open its case, struck the flint, lighting a weak, flickering red flame. "We follow the track," he said. "That's our rope." The guard hesitated. For a second, humanity overpowered protocol. He nodded. They ran. Snow hammered their faces. Wind clawed at their coats. The lantern light flicked wildly, barely cutting through the whiteout. The tracks trembled again. Another warning tremor from the wounded rail behind them. Eric pushed harder. Every breath felt like swallowing knives. Every step was a war. The blizzard erased the world around them until only the tracks beneath their boots existed. Then, faint but rising, they heard it. A distant horn. Long, low, steady. The passenger train. The guard stumbled. "God! They're early. Keep running," Eric yelled. The tower light finally appeared through the storm, blurry, trembling, but real. Eric sprinted the last stretch, slammed into the tower door, tore it open, and shouted, "Stop the line! The rail is broken." The signalman spun in shock. "What?" "The west rail. You must stop the train now." The horn grew louder, too loud, so close it vibrated the tower windows. The signalman grabbed the emergency lever, hands shaking, and pulled it with all his strength. Red signal. Full stop order. But was it too late? Outside, the ground began to rumble. The passenger line was coming. Fast. The tower windows rattled as the passenger train tore through the storm, its headlight a white spear cutting across the rails. The engineer saw the red signal, far too late to stop normally, but he slammed the brakes anyway. Screeching metal filled the air. Sparks exploded in long orange streams beneath the engine. The train skidded, slipping across iced rails, groaning under the force of its own momentum. Eric and the guards stood at the base of the tower, snow swirling around them, watching the impossible happen. A train trying to wrestle physics. The engine slowed, but the broken joint was still ahead. The rail trembled under the approaching weight, bending like a bowstring about to snap. Eric felt the vibration through his boots. He could almost hear the metal fibers stretching, cracking. The train's wheels hit the patched joint. Clank. Crrrrk. Screech. The joint plate screamed, sparks shooting from the wire as it snapped apart in mid-impact. The bolt bent completely sideways. The rail shifted under the weight, and for a split second, the lead wheels lifted off the track. The guard whispered, "Oh God!" But the engineer, fighting every instinct, kept the brakes locked. The wheels slammed back down, caught the rail by a margin thinner than a coin, and the engine lurched forward, off balance, then settled. The rail held. Barely. Just barely. The passenger cars shuddered behind it, swaying dangerously as they rolled past the damaged joint at crawling speed, metal groaning in protest. Inside, terrified passengers clung to seats, unaware how close they'd come to eternity. One by one, the cars crept to a halt, steam hissing into the frozen air. Silence followed. A heavy, disbelieving silence. The signalman leaned out the tower window. "You too. Get up here." Minutes later, inside the warm glow of the tower, he stared at the rail report chart, then at Eric. "You saved that train." The guard swallowed hard. "No. He saved all of us." Eric looked down at his torn hands, frostbitten skin split open around his knuckles. "It was just a small fix," he muttered. The guard shook his head. "No, it was the right fix." Later that day, the Army filed its official report. Malfunction on rail line corrected by prison labor detail. No casualties. That was it. One dry sentence to describe a miracle. But news spreads differently among the people who lived it. Railmen told their sons about the German who ran into a blizzard to stop a train. Passengers told strangers about the prisoner who saved the entire line. Mothers whispered prayers of thanks for a man they'd never meet. And at the Holcomb Depot, months later, when Eric was transferred, someone slipped something into his pocket. A small brass bolt, the one that held long enough to keep hundreds alive, wrapped in a note that said, "Not a stupid fix, a life-saving one." Eric kept it for the rest of his life, because on that frozen Nebraska morning, a single German POW with torn hands and a stubborn sense of duty did the impossible. He stopped history's worst train disaster with nothing but a wrench, a wire, and a stupid little fix.